I'm accompanied by some of the world's greatest artists showcasing how they use... Yeah, they're here. Don't worry. Closer than you think. All right.
EJ!
So here are some of the world's leading artists showcasing how they use Cinema 4D, ZBrush, and the rest of the Maxon tools to create some of the most beautiful imagery you'll see on any screen. To my left is a longtime member of the community, someone who shares both great enthusiasm for his art as well as his techniques, and I'm so happy that he's here to show his workflow into 3D printing. Please, let's give a big round of applause, Maxon. Welcome for Scott Unruh. We'll take a selfie too.
Alrighty. Well, hello everybody. My name is Scott Unruh, and I'm super excited to share a little bit about myself with you today. I'm a proud Colorado native with a deep passion for motion design, character animation, character concept art, and digital sculpting.
Let's get this one real quick.
So pretty much since COVID, my major hobby has been 3D printing. And I've been taking my friends' files and turning them into actual real-life objects of their renders. I'll show you a couple little samples of that. The first one here is from our world-famous EJ Hassenfranz. This was his little Shiba coin to the moon NFT concept. And together we built this little thing, and I had so much fun making this. It really pushed my boundaries of what I could do in 3D printing. The next one here is from Ryan Talbot. This was his NFT series starring Lily, and I fell absolutely in love with her. And he was gracious enough to send me over his files, and we were able to collab and make this little piece together. So with all that being said, I'm going to show you how I made this little guy. This is my little Deadpool in the world of Mega Man. I'm going to break down the sculpt, and I'm going to show you some of the tricks I've learned along the way. But before we begin, I'll show you my little sample of my work here. Okay, as with many of you, I grew up in comics and video games, and Mega Man and X-Men were my absolute favorites. And so I always wanted to see what my favorite X-Men heroes looked like as Mega Man bosses. And with the advances of 3D printing, I'm able to make a real-life object and flex some of my miniature painting skills. Today, I'm going to show you how I got to here, which is my little Deadpool robot. You can come up and take a look at him later. And so basically what I usually end up doing is I start this whole process in Photoshop. And what I do is I just start with a black silhouette. I bounce around between a lot of really loose shapes, a lot of really fast shapes. I'm just really trying to kind of nail the concept here and just experiment. As I keep going down, I'm just gonna keep adding little details and things like that. One of the most important things you do have to realize is when you're doing this, balance, especially if you're printing, is going to be super, super important. You don't want, some of these characters are going to be a little top heavy, and you don't want them not falling over when you're, they're sitting on your desk. And so as I keep going, I'm just going to add little lines, go ahead and let it be sloppy, because you never know when one of these extra little bulges is going to become an exhaust port or some other fun detail like that. And when I was doing this one, I really ended up liking this this kind of Hulk bot here, but it just wasn't right for the Deadpool concept. So I'm gonna put that one on the back burner, and hopefully in the future we'll see a Hulk bot. In the end of the day, I ended up going with this this version of Deadpool. I really was liking the little beer belly here, and basically ended up making that my final concept. Okay, so let's get into ZBrush here and start sculpting this thing out. Within ZBrush, there's so many ways of sculpting, and I envy the people that can go in and just throw in the blob and just start pulling things out and making this amazing thing. I'm just not built like that, so I take a very leveled approach. So being from Colorado, I used to be a big-time snowboarder, and I remember the first time I went down my first black diamond, and standing on top of the hill and looking straight down and seeing how scary and intimidating that was, it makes me feel like a lot like when you're seeing these incredible sculpts and just, you don't even know where to begin. So my best friend basically told me, never look down at the whole mountain, break it down into parts, get to that next rock, get to that next tree, get 15 feet down, get 20 feet down, and then pretty soon by the end of it, you're looking down, you're at the bottom of the hill, and you look up, and you're blown away by like how far you've come. I definitely take that approach when I'm doing sculpting. So I sculpt in a bunch of different phases. So my first phase is just a block-in phase. This is all really super low poly, and this just gets me my proportions, this just gets me my rough shapes of what I like to do, and then I build on from there. So then I usually go on to a second level. This is my primary detail level. And for this one, I'm really focusing on the silhouette. I'm trying to just get all the pieces in there. Really, this is where I spend a bulk of my time. And as I feel like a lot of times if I nail this process down and I nail this step, so much of the decision making and so much of the harder work is done for me here. And then I can just focus on having fun and adding little details. The next level is when I start really going in and start, hammering out those little hinges and little panel lines and drawing in logos and doing rivets and things like that. And then eventually I move on to the final phase of it where I'm doing surface details, telling story with damage, getting my posing in there properly, and going from there. So I'm going to go ahead and break down now some of these parts of going back into the block-in phase. Usually the first thing I'll do is I will go in and I will add my sketch here. So I go into the texture tool, you go ahead and import. I'm going to go ahead and import my sketch. Go back in here, select him, add him to the spotlight. You can zoom him up so you can, test what you're doing. And I like to just kind of put him over here, put him in the corner, get this over here, and then when you hit the Z key, that removes the little spotlight section, and then you can kind of, bounce back and forth. You can turn it on, you can move it, you can scale it up, and you can just kind of bounce back and forth and test your proportions. So when I'm in this first blockout phase, I just bounce, like I said, this is all super low poly, and I use the Q mesh a lot brush. So basically, if you go into B, and then Q, nope, that's not right. So it's going to be B, Q, Z. There it is. And that's going to start giving me these lines of what you're doing. So if you Shift F, that's going to give you your actual topology that you can look at here. And so from this first little get-go here, I'm going to go ahead and just add in a little bit of a line. So when you go into your subdivide here, you can see that squares off that edge. And again, I'm just going to go ahead and keep going in and noodling this all the way down. The next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and add his feet. So I'll go ahead and insert a cylinder. And then I'm going to go ahead and go down to my initialize. And I'm going to make this a Q-sphere. From here, I'm going to go ahead and when you grab your edges and you hit the shift key or the spacebar key, you're going to bring in a bunch of different menus. So you can bevel an edge, you can insert extra edges. I'm going to go ahead and bevel this center edge and split it apart. And then I'm going to go ahead and select it, inverse the selection, go to my move tool, squish this down to make the bottom of his foot here. Release that. Then I'm going to go to the side here and go back into that bevel and pull it out. Select this section, invert it, move it out so you start getting a little bit more of a foot shape. Select the edge. I'm going to insert an edge here right into the center. And from here, I'm going to select this edge and start to give him a little bit of an instep in his foot. Just make it a little more foot shaped. And then when you go into your subdivide, which is D, you can start to see that this is starting to look what it's, what I want it to look like. Brush, move. We're going to move this up and give him a little bit more of a clown shoe feel. And again, I'm always bouncing between D and Shift D just to kind of check and see where I'm looking here. And once I get that looking the way I want to do, I want to go ahead and give him the sole of his foot. So again, back into the Q mesh, or the Z modeler, I should say. And I'm going to go into the Q mesh here. We're going to do a poly loop, because what I'm going to do is pull this out and make a little bit of a bottom of his foot. Now again, when you go into Dynamesh this now, you don't have the, it's really super rounded. So the way around that is you're going to add just the tiniest little bevel here inside these edges. Just pull it out just a tiny little bit. And the beauty about using the Z modeler is it's going to remember its settings. So this little width of this bevel, by just clicking on it, it's going to do the same thing here. And it'll do the same thing down there. So now when I go to do my my subdivisions, you can see that this is really like squared off and looks a lot more like a foot. And then let's go ahead and just center my axis point. We're going to move this into place here. Scale it up. And then go ahead and go into your plugin, Subtool Master, Mirror, and we're just going to mirror this sucker over. And that's really going to give me my first level of in my process here. So once I'm all said and done here, this is pretty much what it's going to look like. And then I'm going to start the next level of my detail. So this is my primary shapes. So I'm going to expand on this. So what I want to do is add his little floop coming off of the back of his head here. So what I'm going to do is select this. I got poly loop selected, so I want to turn this back off and go back to single poly. And just holding the Alt key here, I'm just going to make a little selection, and I'm going to Q mesh this back. Select this edge, center it up, and we're just going to shrink it down. And I want to make this have a little bit more of a curve. So I'm just going to insert a loop here. Make this little selection, and then we're just going to push this down to give it a little bit of a curve. And again, always just going back and forth between Z remesher and my subdivisions and just checking everything along the way. Now I'm going to go ahead and give him a little eye socket or a little place for his eyes and build a little bit of a nose. So I'm going to go ahead and bevel this up. This is about where his eyes would go. And I'm going to insert just another little line here, because what I'm going to do now is spin this around. Grab my move tool, and I'm just going to grab this and start pulling it up. And really get in there and start pushing it. Because then when I go to my subdivisions, you can start to see that a little bit of a nose is going to start taking shape here. And that is really how I'm going to start defining that silhouette. All right, now we're going to go ahead and do his little belly joint here. And so since I'm still working in really, really low poly, I want to start making more and more complicated shapes. So this joint here is going to have his belly. It's going to have a cutout for his torso. And then it's going to have a little bit of a cutout for these hip joints. So the key here when you're booling is I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this body. And let's move this up to the top, because this is going to be my original and then this is going to be my cutout. I want it to have like a little bit of a hip joint, so I'm actually going to go ahead and zoom this one up just a little bit. Insert this little hip joint, and again, go back into your Subtool Master, mirror this over. And now what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and make these, I'm going to up my subdivisions really, really high on this one. There we go. Let's go ahead and delete these lower edges. And let's go ahead and do that same thing for the belly. And let's delete the lower. So now what I'm going to do is you select your little cutout tool, which is this little thing here, and this is going to be your start spot for your bool section. So then when you go to do your live Boolean, you can start to see that I've got a little bit of a cutout. Okay, now that this is ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and go down into my subtool, pick the Boolean part of it, and we're going to make a Boolean mesh. So this is going to drop it into its own brand new subtool. And then from there, you can see that there's a lot going on, and I don't want that because I'm still sculpting in low poly. So let's go ahead and Z-remesh this thing down. I'm going to go ahead and detect my edges, and I'm going to take it up kind of high. So I'm just going to start it at 10 here, and let it work some of its magic. All right. Now, as you can see, the topology isn't really super great here, but the beauty about Z-Remesher is you can just keep smashing the button, and it's going to start to like do different, it's going to start to give you just different little orientations of your mesh here. And then it starts, cleaning up, and it's going to start being able to give you like better loops and things like that. Then I'm going to go ahead and just walk it down. Let's go ahead and take it down to 2.5. And then again, when you go to when you go to subdivide it, you can start to see that it's you can start working on things a lot better. As far as like EJ was talking about, once you start working on too high poly stuff and you start pulling things out, things start to get a little lumpy. So if you're working on this lower res version of it, it definitely like makes things a lot smoother. And then once you're done here, go back into your original file here. And go ahead and insert your new mesh. And then you can go ahead and delete this part of it. And then you can delete this part. And now you can see you've got a little bit of an inset here for this joint. Now when I'm going in, I'm just going to work on my gauntlets real quick here. We're going to select those out. Let's go ahead and split unmask points. That's going to give me these gauntlets. Oh, turn off my live boolean here. Solo this out. Now I want to make a little bit of a cuff here for his inside of his both of his joints on his wrist and then in his elbow. So again, we're going to go back into the handy Z modeler here. We are going to select these edges. And then what I'm going to do is inset. And that's going to push this down a little bit. And then we're going to do the same thing for this joint. Now, one of the things that you're going to run into is just what I did is this right here is super clean. I only have 4 polys to push back. But for some reason, this one pulled out its own little thing here. So going back into the Z modeler, I'm going to go ahead and delete these edges. Oop. Going to delete that little section, the last little section. We're going to go into the bridge section. Select that. Oop. Select this edge. Why is that not working? Oh, because I had bevel on. I want bridge, sorry. And I'm just going to fill these in. Bridge the 2 islands together, and there you go. And then let's go ahead and go back into the Q mesh. Select these sections, and we're just going to push this back. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And, whoop, push it back. Now you can start to see that that's got a little bit of a nice feel to it, but it's not quite there yet. Again, we've got that rounding problem on all of our edges. So let's go ahead and bevel these out. Nope, too much. Just a little bit. Hit that one, and then let's hit this edge. Let's go ahead and do it the same thing to the back. And there you go. You can see that that's squared off nicely. Last thing I want to do is I want to make them even a little more square on the sides. And you can just do that by inserting a nice little loop. Oh, inserting a loop here. That'll square that side off. And one there. And that's exactly what I'm looking for. And I'm just going to go around and keep noodling this thing down until I get to the next level. And really, so once I'm done doing all that, this is what I pretty much end up with. So that's going to show my next level of detail. And then again, we're just going to start back over from the very beginning and just work from the head and start working down and just adding details along the way. So I'm going to go ahead and show you now a little trick on how to make his little Deadpool face mask here. So we're going to take the head and we are going to go ahead and duplicate that. Let's go ahead and solo this out. Now what I want to do is go ahead and subdivide this up really, really high, because I'm going to mask out this part of his face. Delete the lower. And I'm going to go into my mask pen. Okay, another little trick here is this is a very feathered out mask. So what you do, if you take your focal shift down here and you take this all the way down, that's basically your feather tool like in Photoshop. Shrink that down. And that's going to give you a lot more polished of a lot harder of a mask. And then I'm just going to go ahead and draw in a little bit about what I think this should be. I still don't like this it being as chunky as it is, so I'm going to go ahead and just divide this up one more level. Delete the lower. And make a little bit smoother of a mask out of this thing. I'm still working in symmetry, obviously, but I'm going to go ahead and just work on one side. But as I'm masking this out, I want to make sure that that it's how I want to look, how I want it to look like. Keep modeling it in there. And that looks about what I want. So what I'm going to do now, go back into your subtool, and we're going to split out the unmasked points. So I just have the mask. You can go ahead and get back in and delete this one out because you don't need it anymore. And I'm actually going to go ahead and mask out this one because I only want to work on one side, but my symmetry is on. Try that again. And let's go ahead and split that unmasked point and then delete this sucker. All right. Now that I have my mask looking the way I want it to be, I'm going to go ahead and make a low poly version of this. And we're going to do that using the handy Z-Remesher tool. Now, when you look at this, this isn't still what I want. This is still really chunky, and it's not going to be very pretty when I go to QMesh this thing out and extend it out and make it bigger. So what I'm going to do is go down into my deformation tab. There's this beautiful little tool called Polish. Select that little button. And just give it a little polish by groups, and then go ahead and maybe polish the edge a little bit. And that's going to smooth it out really nicely along that edge. And then when you go back in to Z-Remesh it down, you're going to start getting a lot better topology out of this thing. And then by the time I take it down to like 5, it's going to start clearing up these edges. Take it down to 2. Even more. Let's take it down to 0.25. Now that one's a little too much because I'm into losing my nose a little bit. So I'm just going to take it to 0.5. And there we go. And then you can go ahead and go back in. Maybe move some of these edges up a little bit. Clean them out. And then we're going to go back into the handy Z modeler. Select over a face, QMesh, and then this time we're going to go all polys, and we're just going to pull this out. And then again, let's do our little bevel trick. And there we go. Now when we bring it back into the face, you can start to see that mask taking shape. And then we're just going to push it back in just a tiny little bit. And go back into our Z plugin and mirror that sucker back over. And now you start to have your little mask here. Okay. So basically what I did the exact same thing that I just did, and then this is how I kind of made the shape for his belt. But we need a little logo here. And I like to do all my logos in Cinema 4D. So I will do the, draw this out in Illustrator, bring it into Cinema 4D, and then I will go ahead and actually do a bevel this way, or I'll do my extrude. And that's going to give me a really, really nice clean edge. But the one problem about it is when you go to do your multiple levels of subdivision, these edges are going to get really, really mushy and not look very good. So I'm going to go ahead and put in some bevel edges here. I'm going to make it an editable piece here. I'm going to select my edge tool. UL is going to give me my loop selection. And I'm just going to go ahead and select all my little edges here. Whoop. Ooh, definitely got some sensitivity stuff. Okay. Now in this too, I also want to go ahead and select any edge that's a corner. So select these little guys. Select these corners down here. There we go. Give it a little right click. Let's go ahead and add a bevel here. And we just want a little baby bevel. So then you go, once you have it done there, you can go into your extensions and use the Go Z plugin. And go ahead and export that out. And you're going to get this little logo coming in. And so here's a version of it without me doing that bevel step. So then again, when you go to look at your, when you go to subdivide it, it doesn't look very good. But when you do add the bevels, it looks a lot cleaner. And ends up giving you a really, really nice little a logo that you can kind of play with and push back in there. Drop it into place. And there you have your next little mark. And again, going down, I'm just adding all these little hinges and adding these little details of pushing and pulling back low poly geometry. And then once I get done here, it'll end up looking like this. So this ends up being my next little step. And all these panels are just making selections, pushing it back, pulling little parts forward, making it really simple to kind of just maneuver this stuff around. And as I'm going, each level is getting more and more dense and its topology goes. But now it's time to start adding some surface details. So what I want to do for his mask here, we're going to go ahead and go down to this tool called Surface. We're going to add the light box. And this has got a ton of different stuff you can choose from. This is just going to give you an insane amount of things you can play with. I like this one for his little, I kind of wanted a little leathery texture, a little sci-fi leathery texture, so I grabbed this one here. And then when you go into edit, you can actually go ahead and play with all these different little settings. Change the scale, change the strength. Now a lot of this, when you start getting into this surface level of detail, is really going to start being driven by your printer. Different printers have different levels of stuff that it can print. So really, this is going to be dependent on your printer. I can't give you a setting that's going to tell you that it's going to work for every printer. This is where you just got to kind of play with it and print something out and figure out, oh, this needs to be more of a texture and this less of a texture, or this printer may not even be able to capture this printer. I use a resin printer for everything just because I have so much higher of a detail, and I can really get in there and actually like noodle out and get super fine details with this. But yeah, once you get it kind of looking the way you want it to look, you can go ahead and apply it to the mesh. Turn these back to white because I don't want it to be green. And you can begin to see how much this looks in there and starts to fill out your textures of everything. The other nice thing you can do is when you go back into your edit, once you get a texture going that you really, really like, you can go ahead and hit save, and you can save out that texture. So now I have this sci-fi leathery texture, and down the road I can apply it to his belt, I can apply it to his neck, I can apply it to all kinds of different parts of his body. And once I got done with that whole thing, I ended up with this. I found this really cool diamond plate texture that I ended up putting all over his head. I ended up finding this little honeycomb for his eyes. I found a really cool kind of metally, like eroded metal texture for all these gears. And I just saved everything down and just kept adding and adding and adding. Like I said, for me, this leveled approach really, really works well for me, just because I am able to break things down and just move step by step. It's a very, methodical process that works well with my brain. So now my last little level here is going to be start telling some storytelling with some damage. This is the best part of everything, because you do get to like turn off your brain. You get to get into your head a little bit. You get to add gunshots and nicks in his armor and things like that. I'm going to go ahead and add a little Wolverine scratch across his head. So we're going to go into his head here. And for that, I am just going to go into my selection tool. Then let's go ahead and grab his lasso. And I'm going to zoom in here. I'm just going to solo this out. And I'm just going to make a rough scratch. Wolverine's got 3 claws, so he needs another one. And another one. All right. Now that's a little blurry. I don't like that. So we're going to go ahead and go down into the masking tool. And let's sharpen this mask up. And then maybe refine it a little bit more. Add in some details onto this scratch. And let's sharpen it up again. There we go. Okay, if you alt click it, that's going to reverse the mask. Now the bad part about this selection tool is it's actually going to project to the back. And you don't want that. So you can go ahead and just select that out. Just double check and make sure you don't have any little stray mask parts. And then I'm just going to take this and I'm going to move it back. So if you have your little locator icon, that's going to center your thing. And by hitting Alt key, it's going to unlock it. So you can actually go in and move this where you want it to be, just by holding down the Alt key. And then let go of it, and then you get to push it back. And that's going to start giving me my depth in this part of it. And let's go ahead and I like, for this level of damage, I really like the orb crack tool. So that's going to be B, O, and then C. Where'd it go? Brush. Oh, it's not working. Well, anyway, you can go ahead and do a clay buildup as well. Now, by holding, I'm going to go ahead and actually turn off my my spotlight section here, because that does tend to kind of mess up some of your things. Okay. And now by holding the Alt key, you can push this down, shrink this down. Let's go ahead and lower the intensity and just start kind of making this gash a little gnarly here. Smooth it out. I'm going to go ahead and invert the selection here. And now I'm just going to go ahead and build up a little bit of stuff here around it. Maybe smooth it out. But anyway, this gets to be the part where you could just turn off your brain and get to be really super zen with it all. And again, this is all about storytelling. You know, with this little gash, you don't need to tell anybody about it, but you instantly know that he got into a fight. You know, and it's a really cool part of just getting in your head and doing what you want with it. And yeah, noodle that out and you've got yourself a scratch. You can do the same thing for bullet holes. You can do the same thing for nicks in a knee or whatever like that. So basically, once I'm all said and done with this, I'm going to end up with this pose here. I'm going to go ahead and go into posing just a little bit, but really by and large, these are all its own separate tools. I'm just moving and pushing and pulling and turning to make a pose. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a little bit more posing theory. And for that part of it, I'm going to go back to my old school comic book days, how to draw comics the Marvel way. This was my go-to Bible as a kid, like growing up and learning how to draw comic books. Posing is going to be a very, to make that dynamic pose, you want to focus on two things. One of them is balance and the other is silhouette. And, as it's demonstrated here, when you're doing your posing, for the most dynamic pose of an action pose, you want to take the most extreme parts of the motion. So you want the wind up when he's leaning back, and you want the final go through with the punch when he's done. Anything else in the middle is just going to be, it just doesn't look very good. It doesn't have the silhouette. But the most important thing is when you're even in this big dynamic pose and he's leaned really far over, he's still in balance. Even though his body and his torso and his arm is sticking way out, he still has this leg kicking back that's making him have balance. You always want to do that, especially, again, going back to 3D printing. If these characters aren't balanced and you don't have a base on them, they're gonna fall over. Everybody has that Funko Pop that you hit your desk and 9 of them fall over. Bad balance. Don't do that. But it does. It really does make everything look so much better. So then for this, since I don't have an action pose, what I did end up doing is making a very statuesque pose. So that you do that by basically really following curves. So you see here from the tip of his head down to that back leg, you've got a nice little C curve. You've got this little C curve here. You've got a C curve going from leg to leg. If you're going from the side, you've got a nice little S curve that comes down into his thing. You're going to want to twist and turn all of his all of his joints. So if his head is looking, to the right, you want his shoulders looking left, but you want the hips to go back the other way. That's going to give you your biggest range of motion and give it that big statuesque feel. Now, as far as that goes, once you have that ready to go, the very last part, And this is the most time-consuming part. It's the worst part of this, but it's really an important part. You're going to start making keys. Keys are basically your square hole inside your square peg, to put it, as its easiest part of it. And as you go up here, you can see that's what I've done. Because what's going to happen is you want to start breaking this apart. You're going to want to break it apart for several different reasons. The first reason is you're going to want to be able to print this at different sizes. Your printers are going to have a very small bed unless you've got a lot of money and put a lot of money into a bigger printer. So a lot of these printers are a little bit smaller. So you want to break them apart. That way, once you can, print the head at 120% or 150%, and you can start breaking it apart and make a bigger piece out of it. But with that being broken apart, you got to put it back together. So this is where these keys come in and are very, very important to do. The most important part of your keys is you want to make sure they're beveled, because all of these, resins and filament printers, they're solid. So if you have a key that's flaring out in the opposite direction, it's not going to go in the hole. But you also have to be wary of undercuts. So if you're pulling this part of it out and you have a hard edge here that may not line up here, you're going to have to go in and smooth this area out, or it's going to get locked up and you won't be able to put it into place. But really, the most part of the keys I'm going to be doing the exact same thing that I did with the boule. I'm going to take a square, I'm going to shrink it down, and I'm going to boule out one part of it while taking out while adding it to the other part. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but if you do get to this step, I want you to go check out Mr. Ian Robinson's course here on the YouTube. He did this fantastic thing about 3D printing, and so he goes into 2 hours into keys. Like I said, it's the worst part about it, but it is so important to nail down. But he does a whole DDP, it was his week 2 of his DDP. And again, 2 hours, he shows you how to scale it, how to measure it, everything like that. So, make sure that's there for you. And then finally, we're going to go into the last part of it. And this is going to be your slicer. Once you have everything done, you're going to save everything out as an STL file, because all the slicers use STL files. Every single printer has its own slicer. And basically all a slicer is it takes your files, it adds the supports, all the automatic features are really, really good, so it's a very low barrier to entry. And it just, it does what it's supposed to do. There's pro versions of it. Don't ever buy a pro version. All the free versions get you exactly where you need to go. So with the resin printing, the first thing you're going to want to do is hollow it out. And that, again, that's an automatics feature that you can just add in its wall thickness, and you're going to hollow this out. That's going to do a couple things for you. It's going to save you money because you're printing, this resin does cost money, and if you're hollowing it out, you're saving money on that part of it. But then the other part of it is you're going to be saving a lot of time and energy on your printer with the weight. The printer is hanging upside down and dipping into the resin. If this gets to be too heavy, it might fall off the bed. So you definitely want to lighten this out. And so again, it's going to hollow it out. Now with the hollowing out though, the problem is you've got a bubble. Resin off gases. And so what's going to happen is if you don't give it a way to off gas, your prints are actually going to pop and it doesn't happen overnight. It happens weeks or months. So there's nothing worse than, you're on the message boards, you see tons of people that have my print popped. And this is, like I said, this is months after the fact. You have it done, you think you're excited about it. So a lot of times what you got to do is you got to cut a couple little holes in here. And that's going to let that gas escape out of it. And then basically, the next part of it is you're going to add supports. These supports are going to add a little bit of little tiny divots. Like everybody that's done a model kit in their life has had that model tree, and you break off your little plastic pieces of your Ferrari or whatever that you have, and then you put them together and you see a little dent where that joint was together. So these do the exact same thing. So a lot of times you want to take this over and you want to move this to the bottom. So this bottom part is your plate. So you want to put the supports on the bottom or in a place that's not going to be seen. Just like that. And that's going to do, like I said, that's going to give you your best way of hiding these little imperfections. You'll still have to go and maybe do a little sanding. You may have to do a little bit of filling, but this is going to cut out a lot of that work for you. And then finally, the last part is sending it to the printer. Again, this is all really automatic. This is really cool because you type in how much your bottle of resin was, and it'll actually calculate the weight. It'll calculate the price. So to do this little Deadpool head cost me $1, and it's going to take 4 hours to print. And then again, you just set everything up. You send it over, and then you're ready to go. I'm just going to go ahead and give you a couple little things about printing here, or about painting. Once you're done painting, you can use any kind of paint. You can use acrylics, you can use rattle can, you can just spray paint it. I would suggest that the first thing that you do is prime it, because that's going to give you a better bond from your paint. So you need your paint, you need your primer, and then you need your resin. You want something to combine those together. But as a small warning, all that stuff doesn't play well together. So sometimes you do need to test it out and focus on what plays well together, because there's been, I did one for EJ. I got it all printed and painted. It looked great. And then when I went to clear coat it, the clear coat didn't match the resin, and it melted all of my paint off of it. And it sucks. So that is something you do want to kind of test. And once you start getting into, doing this more and more, which paints you trust, things like that. I will say that painting you can definitely go get the cheap paints, but what's going to happen is as you advance and get better, you are going to want to invest in better paints. The reason for that is the cheaper paints, you have a filler and then you have pigment. The cheaper paints have more filler and less pigment. The more expensive paints have more pigment, less filler. So a lot of times what you're going to end up having to do with the cheaper paints is do more and more layers. And when you're doing more and more layers, that means you have to line up things more. It's going to take more time. So eventually you are going to want to invest in better paints. But for when you're starting out, by all means, get the cheap paint, practice on it, make mistakes, have fun. And that is everything I have for you. There he is, finally done. I'll have these around if you want to come back and take a look at them.
Awesome.
And we'll go.
Great job, Scott. Great job. So we do have time for a couple of questions. And if you're feeling a little too shy, just jump over to our partner booth over at Dell, and he'll be able to talk with you. He'll be around for about the next hour. So for anybody here, do we have any questions for Scott on his process, creativity, X-Men trivia, you name it? What do you got? Any questions?
Who saw Deadpool? Raise your hand.
Amy again from the front.
Hello. So there is a projection.
Repeat the question.
Okay.
Online audience.
Okay, fair enough. So basically, it's a question about texturing and how it maps onto the piece. There is one thing that I do need to talk to the production crew about. So if you worked in Substance and things like that, you know about triplaners and things like that. Unfortunately, there is no triplaner that I know of. Hopefully Ian can tell me differently, but as far as I know, there isn't one. So a lot of times you're going to have to mask out sections, hit it this side, hit it this side. It's a little time consuming, but it is like a way to map it out as far as getting that diamond plate on this side, on this side, on this side as well. So yeah, hopefully they do get that a little bit more. Like I said, a triplanar would be amazing in that part of it. But right now, it's just, as far as I know, it's just masking.
Any other questions? All right, well, let's give Scott another round of applause. And any other questions, just visit him at our partner station. Stay tuned. We're going to be up with our next presenter, Sarah Gibson. You're in for another treat.
Thank you, everybody.
See you in a little bit, Internet.